The male gaze. The subject for one of my more controversial yet widely popular videos on this platform. I'm of course talking about my analysis of Anya from Mouthwashing. I'm guessing you've seen it by now, and I'm assuming you have at least some sort of opinion on it. Because of this, I won't be re-explaining what the male gaze is, although in my discussion in this video, you'll probably be able to pick up on it anyway. Instead, this essay will serve as a sort of reaction to my own thoughts, and the thoughts of my dear viewers. With that being said, this is not me backtracking in the slightest, or taking back anything I said. Honestly, it's more doubling down if anything. Rather, I have discovered new things to talk about regarding this topic, and while this won't be all of my thoughts, it will be most of them on the discussion. To get the obvious out of the way, men can be victims of SA. And their experience in that is not any less horrific, this coming from a victim of that same abuse himself. In this way, I am living proof that male victims exist, and I even plan on centering an entire game about it, so you know I'm passionate about this. However, with that being said, it's still different, and not just in its frequency. Women are far more likely to be victims, that is a statistical fact. But what does this do beyond even that is create a certain culture. Rape is fetishized in every country on this planet. And while some are more obvious than others, I'm looking at you, Japan. Even in the US where I'm from, this is the case. I mean, for fuck's sake, your newly elected president is a convicted rapist. Porn does a lot of harm to people, even down to their very brain chemistry. But perhaps the worst thing it does is perpetuate this fetishization. Yet, it also exposes it. I mean, do you really think it's a coincidence that the popular videos on US porn sites are teen, just turned 18, and stepsis content? Seriously, there is a concentrated effort to push out, let's call it what it is, pedophilic, incestuous, and rape-adjacent content out to young, impressionable boys. This is to the point where Pornhub, instead of installing better age requirements for gatekeeping its content, instead has opted to literally shut down servers in several US states. Of course, this isn't technically pedophilia. I mean, they are 18, but come on. They know what they're doing. I know what they're doing. You know what they're doing. I will not insult your intelligence by explaining the mental gymnastics they're pulling off here to skirt the line of societal acceptability and illegal behavior. This is also true of porn that is so BDSM that it is essentially just made for people that wish to sexually assault women. But of course, in many ways, porn dictates what is societally acceptable anyway. Men run this world, and virtually all men consumed pornographic material in their youth in this modern era. Material that has shaped not just how they view women and themselves, but even how they view morality itself. We as animals are driven by sex. It's obviously how we reproduce, and the survival of the species is, fundamentally, what society is all about. Porn preys on this innate human nature and perverts it, all while destroying our literal gray matter and making us dumber. And when you think about it, morality is all about shaping society not necessarily to be a better place in all cases, but rather to make it more hospitable, to make surviving easier to do. Women do contribute to this culture. After all, they make up the majority of porn stars on this planet. And yes, Jimmy, they can be assault apologists too, although much less frequently. But the main concept of my Anya analysis is that, while we must hold individuals accountable for their actions and decisions, it is more beneficial to societal healing to instead look at these issues through a wider sociological lens. And when you do that, it becomes clearly evident that, with men at the helm in virtually all civilizations on this planet, from worldly superpowers to small tribes, it is the very system to blame for the contributions that these many women make towards sex and porn culture. During the most recent presidential race in the US, much discussion was focused on Kamala Harris. In their words, sleeping her way to the top. In my response, are we not smarter than this? I know most conservative values are really just grifting to the sheeple, so much so that the banned TikTok crowd is now pro-TikTok, Even the very person who started this ban in the first place, Trump, don't forget that. But come on. Use your fucking brain, dear viewer. Does it not say more about the patriarchal system itself than any individual woman that someone is even able to sleep their way to the top? I'm also not saying the Harris conspiracies are true, but regardless, this does happen from time to time. And I ask you this, who has the power in the situation? An employee or their boss? Most would say offering a position of power to a woman or even a man based entirely on the sexual favors they can give you is utter workplace sexual harassment in the lightest of terms. So why is it that when women do it and then get that position, the onus or blame is now on them? Let's say for a second that Kamala Harris truly did sleep with several men in power in order to quickly rise to the political ranks. Again, I've really done the research, but let's digress for a second. This would inherently mean that, at least initially, she was completely being taken advantage of. And yet people will say she was in the wrong. Do you see how that's stupid? I pray that you see how that is stupid. A woman may very well go into porn, but she does not have the power in that situation. The porn company does. And they are intentionally taking advantage of the woman, or even girl, in this case. They're taking advantage of the fact that people are driven by money to survive and thrive, and that many young women are desperate for that money. It's not a coincidence that OnlyFans exploded in popularity during the pandemic after all, but we'll be getting to that in a second. This is where the male gaze comes into play. Young girls grow up in a fetishized culture that tells them that their value primarily rests in their body, in their sexual potential. It is not their brains that society cares about, or their potential to serve the greater good. Not even just because men have already deemed themselves that is their job, but even more so, men in power probably see what good women could objectively bring to the world, but they simply don't care. Because they'd rather have these women as sex objects, or maybe they don't want them to usurp the men. Could be a lot of possibilities, honestly. Because the men in power are not the actual smart ones the majority of the time. Either being born into the role, or being just sociopathic enough to ruthlessly obtain power without being so sociopathic that they do something even morally corrupt people can't deem as societally passable. Surely the men in power cannot fool us into believing they want what's best for the world, right? Especially when their efforts were actively burning the planet down. I'm looking at you, SpaceX and Elon Musk. When you grow up in a society that tells you that you are inherently lesser, you begin to actually believe it, because it's all you really know. This formulates, of course, into a second self that critiques everything the main self does through the framework that society, one dominated by white men specifically, is laid out. Everyone is defined by the work they produce. Me as a YouTuber is defined by my videos. An artist is only as good as the art they make, and an office worker is only as good as the work they can officially pump out. It shouldn't be this way, but it is. This is true of all sexes and genders. However, for women, there is an external hyperfixation not just on the work they produce, but also, well, how they look while doing it. And this is somewhat true of even men. I mean, people like attractive people, but if you were going to sit here and say the beauty standards for men are anywhere as harsh as it is for all women, you would simply be wrong. As I said, female victims of SA are inherently different from their male counterparts. Not just in frequency, but perhaps because of that frequency. The standard man does not have to live in constant fear of sexual assault, yet I've had so many women tell me that they do. Even just beyond the male gaze, it's a certain pressure that women and girls live with. That fear that shapes even their very self-worth. Now, I'm not here to say that women who do porn don't have self-worth. Again, as I said in my original video, I'm just a guy. a dude, if you will, saying all this. A random person on the internet. I even think the push for women owning their own material and getting paid directly, i.e. OnlyFans, is a good thing relative to how the system has been. But I find the movement towards women empowerment to be interesting. Many feminists would say that women who being free to express their sexuality is a good thing. I will not disagree with them. However, perhaps it says something that in that freedom, they maybe ended up right back at square one. They're being sexually gratifying to men. It's as if their vision of freedom is not true freedom and is instead entirely dictated, despite everything, by the perverse society that created them. Little voiceover note here. I don't know how I didn't end up putting this in the actual script when I wrote it. It is important to note that for women's sexual liberation, even though it could be influenced by men's own gratification, it isn't necessarily for it. I know a lot of women, they want to freely express themselves sexually, not to appease men, but just for themselves. But I think, I don't want to say the problem with that, because like I said, who am I to say it's a problem? But it still inadvertently does gratify men, and I think it's worth looking at why that's how they express themselves. Why is sexual expression, for an example, wearing less clothes, stuff like that. A society run by men. If you've been a fan of the channel for a bit, you know I ultimately don't believe in free will. I've said so in multiple videos. And since I decided to go ahead and make this very video anyway, potentially against YouTube's better judgment, fuck it. It's extra time. Use this timestamp if you feel like skipping them. Oh yeah, and Attack on Titan and Cyberpunk Edgerunner spoilers ahead. The most popular video on this channel at the time of this writing is my analysis of Cyberpunk Edgerunners. And in it I discussed the free will of David Martinez, the main character / protagonist. This was under the context of a kid who grew up poor and completely undervalued by the greater world at large. In that video, I stated that this is the cause of David's low self-esteem, and is ultimately what makes him choose the life of cyberpunk, because he owes no value over his own life. I'd like to take a look at Aaron through this scope. He doesn't exactly have low self-esteem, and it can be said that he values his life over all others. In this way, he's the opposite of David, so why even bring it up? Well, friends, I do it for good reason. Aaron isn't actually so different. Let me explain. When living in a world that is filled only with fear, with the constant pressure existing just beyond those fragile walls, life can seem just a little bit bleak. And since things are so bleak, that can devalue life within your own eyes. Being taught at a young and formative age that life is fickle, that things can end at any moment, creates a unique kind of person. Someone who usually secretly cares very little for their own life and cares even less for the life around them. Or they can value life above all. It can really go either way, as Armin does. In Aaron's case, he is a combination of these two, as he believes himself to be special simply because he was born of this world. This puts him on a mad path that values freedom above everything else, without ever really knowing what that means, and without ever considering the quality of life for everyone else. Lives that he ultimately values very little, in no small part due to the desensitization, I could not pronounce that word, towards violence he was exposed to from an early age. He clearly still cares about these lives, but just not nearly enough, and certainly not more than his own. What the series is ultimately trying to do, at least I believe, is showcase a predetermined fate. This is the metatextual significance of the Founder Titans and Attack Titans' ability to transcend time itself. To show us that while we can make our own decisions detached from others, the personality and very mind we make the decisions from is undeniably influenced by others. When a child is born, they also live in the past, present, and future, all simultaneously. At least in a weird roundabout way. Everything they're going to do, everything they're going to be is determined within that exact moment, as every person they'll ever meet are also set in their own paths. Think of it this way. The collective consciousness is a vast ocean, and within that ocean are waves. They represent the individual people. Those waves then surge with energy, and then create other new waves in the water. Except the pathway for each wave is already predetermined, as its energy level and trajectory are already set in stone due to the influence of other waves. And those waves, I'm sure saying waves a lot here, are also influenced by others. It's a constant line of descending turtles down the rabbit hole, with each wave both affecting others and being affected by others. Each person in this life is set on a predetermined path, and that path will have them meeting a lot of different people. They are predetermined to meet those people, as the circumstances of those others' lives have dictated they would meet said person. Something we'll be getting into more in a bit. In this way, a child can live in the past because they have been formed by it. They can live in the present because they are, well, literally living in it. And they can live in the future because that future is set in stone. You can try to rebel against that future, but that just means you are meant for a different future, like Gabby. That some part of you would dictate that you would eventually go against the most obvious path. And just because the obvious one doesn't mean it's necessarily the path you were meant to go down. I think this is the importance of the paths and why it gets its name. All Eldians on a fundamental level are connected via the paths, and are, in a way, all enslaved to it. Not even to mention that at any moment they can become a Titan, but even their very memories are subject to manipulation. Memories make up such a huge part of our personalities, so if you can selectively delete them through the past and founding Titan powers, you can essentially control these people, giving them no true free will. And at a metatextual level, these paths are the same as the path other people take towards you, forming who you are, developing memories with you. Quote over. In Aaron's case, the threat beyond the walls morphs his concept of what freedom even is. In actual reality's case for women, the threat of sexual assault can serve a similar purpose. Again, I won't disagree with women on this and say sexual freedom in this way is a bad thing, but it is also important to note that it might still be influenced by men. If a woman is scared of being sexually taken advantage of, they may hide their bodies. Of course, many men are abhorrent pigs who don't care what you're wearing, but this is still, at the end of the day, a defense mechanism on the woman's part. The opposite of this, then, would being able to expose your body and express your sexuality freely without fear. And we could call this sexual liberation simply based on it being the direct juxtaposition of the first scenario. But sexual freedom? I'm just not sure. Freedom, at least in my definitions, necessitates separation from external influence. But if your freedom hinges on simply the fact that you are doing the opposite of what your oppressors want, then I'm not sure if I would call that actual freedom. Liberation, yes, but are you making this decision based on your free will? Perhaps. But perhaps not. I'd like to take this conversation over to soccer, dear God, what has this video become, and Blue Lock specifically, the anime. Spoilers ahead for season 2, by the way. Near the end of the second season of Blue Lock, Atoshi Rin faces a dilemma. He has played soccer ever since his brother, Atoshi Sei, abandoned him, for the sake of revenge, for the sake of liberation from his influence. However, as Sei points out, he is still the reason Rin plays soccer, even if it's not to directly play with him. In Rin's rebellion, he has inadvertently made his reasoning for playing soccer even more about his brother, even though he's juxtaposing the concept of playing with Sei. It is only once he realizes this that he can return to zero and inherit his true ego, that of the destroyer mode. He does not care about revenge or even his brother Sei at all. He just wants to burn it all down. And his playstyle in Berserker mode reflects this shift beautifully, as he unintentionally plays the direct opposite way that Sei does. That actually might be Sai. How you pronounce that, I'm not even sure. It is importantly not dependent or hinged upon his brother anymore, And even though his playstyle is the opposite, his thought process is not. He is free of his brother's influence, at least somewhat. The reality for women is similar. In their rebellion, they do the opposite of what they were taught. But in that rebellion, they unintentionally still align with the male gaze. In that rebellion, they still are dependent upon and hinged upon the opinions of men. I'd love to end this video off with telling women to just do whatever the fuck they want. That is true freedom, as opposed to just doing the opposite of what the men want in the surface. But of course, life isn't an anime. It's sadly not that easy. Because what anyone wants, as I explained in the Anya video, is entirely dependent on what they were raised to want. And women were sadly raised in a patriarchal society. They still are to this day. Voiceover note here, I'm also not saying don't rebel against the system. Very much do that. Just think about the ways that you're doing that, I guess, is my grander point here. My solution, perhaps, is just to put more women in political power. Can I get a "let's vote for a woman US president" in the chat, please? But maybe things aren't that easy. I'm honestly not sure. Again, it is vital to understand that I'm just a yapping white dude on the internet. And while I have opinions on the matter, you must take them with a grain of salt. And, as always, thank you for watching.